Hello everyone, Rebecca here from StockingMyPantry.com, and in today's video I'm going to be going through the process of talking about and showing you how to dehydrate cheese and make cheese powder. Now what I've done is I've already written a blog post. You can see it on the video, and I'm going to be going through the blog post bit by bit, and there's a ton of photos and everything, so you'll see the process that I went through. Let's get into it. Okay, so the reason that I decided to dehydrate cheese was because cheese is something that's really missing in my prepper pantry. I have bought freeze-dried cheese, but I don't have a freeze dryer myself. And freeze-dried cheese, if you buy it, I bought it from Thrive, and it was really, really good, but it was also very expensive. I think the current price is around $75 for a number 10 can. And I just really prefer doing things myself. So after a lot of research, I decided to give it a go myself. It turned out great, and I'm going to walk you through the process now. How to dehydrate cheese for food storage. You can see I've got two cans there of dehydrated cheese. I've got the cheese powder, and I also have shredded cheese. And for some reason, in all the research that I did before doing this video, everyone that dehydrated cheese made cheese powder out of it, which is great for things like macaroni and cheese, and I demonstrate that at the end. I show some pictures of making mac and cheese with the cheese powder. But I love the shredded cheese for things like tacos and things like that, so I wanted to give it a try, and it turned out great. So that's what we're going to get into. Okay, so the first thing is to choose the right cheese. Now, I actually plan to do a lot of experiments in the future with things like cottage cheese and some other things. I've been researching it, and I'll be doing more. But so stay tuned for those. But what I wanted to talk about in this little section on choosing the right cheese is the only thing to be aware of is that anytime that you cook cheese, it becomes a little less pungent, a little less strong tasting. The flavor mellows. And so what I decided to do here is I got extra sharp cheddar cheese. I just got it from my grocery store. You can see already grated. And it's actually preferable to buy blocks of cheese and grate it yourself. But I don't really have a good food processor right now, so I decided just to buy the extra sharp cheddar cheese for this project. So now let's talk about preparing cheese for dehydrating. Let's say that you didn't buy the cheese already shredded. You could buy a block of cheese. If you've had it, put it in the freezer first. It'll crumble really easily. Or you can cut it up into small bits. Now that obviously takes a lot of time, because I think you'd want if you're going to cut it up, you'd want the pieces no bigger than about 1/3 of an inch, 1/2 inch at the absolute most. But cheese is already something a little bit tricky to dehydrate because of the high fat content. So I really recommend going smaller, as small as possible, before dehydrating the cheese. So the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to put the cheese on your dehydrator trays. And with your dehydrator trays, I'm using, for this project, my Kasori and the Nesco, either one, but most dehydrator trays, the trays by themselves have pretty big holes in them. So you want to line something on it. But I really wanted better airflow, and also I wanted something to absorb the fat as it dehydrated. So I ended up using just the metal trays that came with my dehydrator, and I got some flour sack towels and put them on the trays. Now you can see here the picture of what happened. So I really wasn't sure how to use it, because I hadn't used the flour sack towels on my dehydrator before this. And so at first I put the flour sack towels that I have are big, and you can cut them to size, but I'm going to tell you in a minute why it's better if you don't. But what happened is I put the flour sack towel down on the table put the dehydrator tray on top, and started folding it in. Now, the problem with that is then you end up with this big bulky thing and it's hard to slide it into the dehydrator. So on the right, you can see that I ended up just folding the towel to be about the same size as the rack and put it on top. Okay, so the next thing that you're going to do is you're just going to distribute the cheese on the dehydrator tray. So originally I planned, if you saw in that picture, the first picture with the packages of cheese, I had 3 1-pound packages of cheese. And I thought that I would put 8 ounces of cheese on each tray. But what you see here is just 4 ounces of cheese. And I felt like it's piled up enough. Maybe I could have put 8 ounces on, but I really didn't want to give that a try because, you know, I thought it's not going to dehydrate as well. There's so much fat in cheese that it would just be a big mess. So I ended up putting only 4 ounces of cheese on top of the towels on the dehydrator trays. And here you can see what the dehydrator looks like with the tray fully loaded. So the towels were a little bit bulky, but the trays slid in just fine. It worked great. Okay. So a key thing when you're dehydrating cheese is to dehydrate it at a low temperature. So, anywhere between 95 and about 115 degrees is good. You don't want to go over 115 degrees because then the cheese will start to melt and it will be a big mess. You don't want to melt the cheese. You don't want to cook the cheese. You just want to dehydrate the cheese. So I started off at 110 degrees and that probably would have been fine, but I started smelling this like strong cheese smell, you know, like when cheese is cooking. And so after about a half an hour, I reduced the temperature down to 100 degrees. And that's what I did for the remainder of the time. So after about 5 hours in the dehydrator, the cheese was starting to dehydrate, but it wasn't anywhere close to being dehydrated. I didn't even bother putting a picture up because it really, you know, you don't see a huge difference when you're dehydrating cheese in the looks of the cheese. And so I didn't put a picture up there, but it was still pretty soft and bendy and not anywhere close. So I stuck it back in the dehydrator. And after about 11 hours in the dehydrator, the cheese was completely dry. Now, for you, it may be different depending on how much you've piled up the cheese, how much humidity there is in your home, and other things like that. But it took about 11 hours. And there's a picture of it there, what it looked like at that point. Now, you can see it still looks mostly like just fresh cheese like it did before going in. And that's one thing that's quite a bit different with cheese from other things. Usually most things you dehydrate, you know, they shrink way up and they look totally different. This looks quite a bit the same, and you may or may not be able to tell, but the exterior of the cheese has almost like a chalky like look to it. Not real chalky, but just it's dull. It looked dull. And also it was kind of hard, and it also just snapped instead of bended. Another test was that it, when I dropped it into a little bowl, it made like a clinking sound. And actually, I just remembered that. I'm going to grab one of the jars of cheese, and at the end I'm going to shake it so you can hear what it sounds when it's fully dehydrated. But anyway, so that's how you tell that it's dry. It will look kind of dull. It will snap when you break it. There won't be any bending, any feeling of moisture or anything like that at all, and it'll make a clinking sound. Okay. Now, one thing that you might want to do after you've dehydrated the cheese before you powder it or do anything else to put it into storage, is to put it into a towel-lined bowl. Now again, I used one of my flour sack towels, and I'll put a link for those in the description so you can see the type of towel that you would want to use. And I did that to absorb any additional fat that might be on the towels. Now, here's something interesting is before I did this project, I read a ton of blog posts. I watched a lot of videos, and everybody had, there was a lot of fat on the cheese throughout the process, and they were having to blot it and do all that kind of stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these. Let's see, down here, down a little further, I'm going to talk about why I think I didn't have that problem. You could see it was bone dry. And so when I dumped my cheese into the bowl, the towel didn't absorb anything. But, that's a precautionary thing that you can do, is just put it in, give it another chance to blot off any of the fat that might be to just blot off any of the fat that might have still be on the cheese. So just pause there because the grandfather clock was going. It's a noisy place here. But anyway, so now the next thing that you can do, and everybody, and pretty much everybody that I've ever watched these do videos on or read blog posts, turn their cheese into cheese powder. And so, like I said, that I wanted shredded cheese also. So what I did is I took about half of it and I powdered it. Now, I used my Ninja blender for that. In most times in the past when I powder things, I use a coffee grinder that I use only for my dehydrating projects. A coffee grinder that you use for coffee would probably have a pretty strong coffee flavor attached to it. And so I recommend having a coffee grinder that you use only for your dehydrating projects. Or in this case, I just used a bullet blender and worded in that. I found it best to just like pulse it a little bit at a time until it was pretty powdered, and then I ran it for short periods of time. And one thing that you want to avoid is the blender getting so hot that there's a lot of condensation and that type of thing. Now you can see in the jar that the powder is not like a fine cheese powder like you'd get in a box of mac and cheese, or, when you buy cheese powder at the store. I think I probably could have gotten it ground down finer, but I think it's because you're working, with just actual cheese, and there's no other, like, I don't know, who knows what they put in in those things, right? But other maybe agents, powdery agents, that help it powder up. I'm not really sure, but it was a little bit granularly, so I don't know that it would work. It would probably work okay on popcorn, but it probably wouldn't work super great. But mainly what I plan to use this for, and what I recommend, is making a cheese sauce and that type of thing for mac and cheese, or cooking with it somehow where it's going to melt down. But I'll get into that in just a little bit more. So now I want to talk about the benefits of using the flour sack towels. And you can see some pictures here of the flour sack towels. I'll put up bigger versions of them so you can see them a little better. But I think it was actually to my advantage that they were large and that I had to fold them so there were multiple layers. Because remember I said that there wasn't a lot of fat from my cheese, and I didn't have to, anytime that I checked, I didn't have to blot the cheese at all. It was just the flour sack towels were completely absorbing any of the fat that was coming off of the cheese. So it was interesting because the top layer had a lot of color, a lot of splatter looking things from the cheese, the orange cheese. The next layer down had a little bit, and the third layer had, it was basically the third and fourth layers were just white. They were just white. So I definitely recommend that over paper towels. Now, obviously, if you only have paper towels, then use that. But if you use the flour sack towels and you have the multiple layers, you know, they're huge. I forget what size mine are, but they're huge. And so I had to fold it in basically into fourths to get it to reach, to cover the rack properly. I think that you probably won't have the problem with the fat because the towels will absorb it well. Now, I wanted to show you the towels after I washed them because I wasn't sure if the stain would come out, but you can see them hanging on the line there. I did, when I washed them in hot water, and I put just a teeny bit of bleach, and then after washing them, I ran it through another rinse cycle to get rid of that. But I used just such a small amount. Maybe it wouldn't have been necessary. Next time I'm probably going to try washing without it. But you can see that the stains came out. And so that's not a problem. They'll be great for me to use for my next project, whether that's, you know, making a tincture or straining yogurt or dehydrating more cheese. So now let's talk about how to store dehydrated cheese. The most important thing with storing dehydrated cheese is for it to be in vacuum sealed, because it's going to, if you don't vacuum seal, it might stay in the jar for 2 weeks at the most without starting to get kind of funky. So you want to make sure and vacuum seal it. And I'm actually going to go grab the jar of cheese so that you can hear what it sounds like dehydrated. Okay, so this is the shredded cheese, and I want you to listen to that. I'm actually making this video about a week after I dehydrated the cheese, and the shredded cheese still has a nice crunchy, for lack of a better word, sound and appearance to it. So anyway, I think that a key is definitely you want to use a vacuum sealer. You can put it in Mylar bags and put in an oxygen absorber and do it that way. I personally don't do that. I just always use mason jars for everything, and I put in one of the attachments and used my handheld food saver, and that did it really well. And I've kept them handy, and so I've been just kind of checking them to make sure that it stays sealed. Now, you don't have to do that forever, but at the beginning I wanted to do that, and also to where I could check and see if there was any moisture. And in both the powdered cheese and the grated cheese, it still looks great. I mean, there's no moisture and they're both very dry. So one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and you can maybe kind of see it in this picture, is that the lid on the powdered cheese, there's like a little nick. You can reuse your canning jar lids when you're for dehydrated food and vacuum sealing, but that lid had a little nick in it, and so it didn't seal properly, and I had to replace it with another lid. Also, you can notice that there's a little coffee filter on top. I always do that whenever I'm vacuum sealing the powdered things. And so I did that in the for the powdered cheese before vacuum sealing it. I put a coffee filter on top, and then I vacuum sealed it. Now we're going to talk about how to use the dehydrated cheese. And so I started off, I did just a small test amount, which I love to do anytime that I am trying something for the first time. And this was a little interesting thing for me because, like I say, I haven't found anyone else who did the shredded cheese, dehydrated shredded cheese, and just kept it shredded to use on tacos and that type of thing. So I wasn't sure exactly what to do. So what I did is I just put a tablespoon of the shredded cheese into a small mason jar, and I put a teaspoon and a half of water. I did that a half a teaspoon at a time, just put it in and stirred it and so on. And on the left, you might be able to see that there's a little bit of water in there. And on the right, I just wanted to show you that after stirring it, there was a tiny bit of water still left. And so that was good because there was still a little bit water that the cheese could absorb. Probably in the future, I would try maybe 2 teaspoons of water, just give it a little bit more, but you don't want it sopping wet. So then what I did is I put it in the refrigerator overnight. Now, I don't know that that would be necessary, but you'd probably want to do it for at least, a half hour or so to give the cheese a chance to soak up the water. But I did it overnight, and the next morning when I checked it, it really seemed just like fresh cheese. So I want to talk now about using the rehydrated cheese. So you can see I decided to just pop it on a tortilla. I just wanted to see how it would melt. And so I took that tablespoon of rehydrated cheese and I put it on the tortilla. On the left, you can see it really just looks like fresh cheese, and it tasted like fresh cheese. On the right, you can see that I have the melted cheese, and I put it in the microwave for about 30 seconds, and it was actually longer than I should have put it. You can see around the edges it's overdone, but the bottom line is the cheese melted great, and it tasted good, like eating it before I melted it. So it'd be really good on tacos, that type of thing. You can see I have tacos on my head because that's how I would mainly use this. But then it would also melt well for quesadillas and that type of thing. So that was a success. Okay, so the next thing that I tried was making a cheese sauce out of the powdered cheese. And to do this, I started off by making a white sauce. I took 1 tablespoon of butter and melted it, put a tablespoon of flour, and stirred that into the butter using a whisk until it was smooth, and, did it for about a minute just to kind of get rid of that raw flour taste. Added in a cup of milk, again, whisking and stirring the whole time to get rid of any lumps. And then once I simmered the white sauce for a bit, and then once it thickened, I dumped in the cheese powder. For that measurement, for basically a cup of butter, and not a cup of butter, a cup of milk, I used 1/4 cup of the powdered cheese. And you can see the finished cheese sauce. It turned out really great. And from that, I made some mac and cheese that was just delicious. So it turned out terrific, and I'm definitely happy that I did this. What I am planning to do is I'm not planning on using the cheese that I dehydrated anytime soon. I'm going to check it at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and a year. I think it'll last a lot longer than that, but I would definitely recommend following me on my blog, because I'll update the blog post with how the long-term storage of this went. Well, not really long-term, because I'm only going to keep track of it for a year. But I think if it works for a year, it would last longer than that. Again, when it's properly, excuse me, again, when it's properly vacuum sealed. So I'll be doing some updates on that, and I might do it here on YouTube also, but definitely on my blog. And I'll leave a link to the blog post, and there will be a place to subscribe for updates. So if you want to do that, be sure and check the description for that. So there's other options for adding cheese to your prepper pantry. There's powdered cheese, commercially powdered cheese, and there's also freeze-dried shredded cheese. And I'll leave some links for those in the description as well, in case you prefer to buy it. But honestly, I felt like this turned out well enough, and I think it was much cheaper doing it myself. And so I'm planning to do a lot more, and then just keep checking what I have in storage to see how it holds up over time. So if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe and if you would give me a thumbs up. And until next time, I hope that you enjoy continuing to stock your pantry. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.